going to be Megan, who's going to talk about games for environmental outreach training. So this is the concept of introducing educational games into the classroom and the implications on public engagement and outreach. It relates to the Public Engagement Priority Action 2.1, engaging businesses and other priority stakeholders in estuary and watershed protection activities and education programs. You're on. Unmute.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Sosby, and I'm the Conservation Specialist for the CHNEP. And today I will be sharing information on the power of games in the educational and public engagement setting, as well as highlighting a great interactive game developed by the Minnesota Sea Grant to introduce the concept of watershed level management and to students and stakeholders. And this photo to the right here is actually a photo that I had taken back in May. I attended the Sarasota Watershed Game Train the Trainer session, which was really cool. And then the woman to the right is Karen Bareford, who is one of the lead developers for the game that I'll be sharing with you today. Next slide, please. So the role of games, specifically role-play-based games in as a teaching mechanism, have been studied for years, suggesting that introducing such activities in the classroom can lead to the beneficial development and increased understanding of the topic or focus of the game at hand. Games are fun, they are challenging, thought-provoking, stimulating, and help improve reasoning and strategizing. The role of gameplay in the adult education setting has also been proven to break down barriers amongst stakeholders, as game playing environment is typically more friendly and lighthearted when trying to introduce serious situations or complex topics. The concept of role-playing games allows players to participate in a simulation of a serious situation and provoke innovative experimental thinking in a lower stakes environment. And all of these factors are extremely important when presenting watershed management and environmental stewardship, especially to gain new target audiences and the interest of children. Next slide, please. So the Minnesota Sea Grant and University of Minnesota Extension developed the Watershed game in 2006 with the goals to increase the involvement of both students and local leaders in learning how to make informed decisions regarding watershed scale management. Students and stakeholders who participate in the game are tasked with meeting a clean water goal by making a series of management decisions and implementing policies to mitigate non-point source pollution within their community, all while trying to stay within the confines of a strict budget. Participants in the game are given a number of pollution units that they must reduce throughout the game and a goal of a number of resilience units that they should strive for. If individuals can reduce their amount of pollution units as a whole community and meet the clean water goal, then they have ultimately won the game. The game also highlights the diverse and sometimes competing interests of various areas within a community by assigning players to represent different agencies and community member roles, such as the agriculture side, industrial port, urban center, residential, and rural coast. So as the need for the understanding of responsible management of water resources has grown, the coastal model of the watershed game was developed to enhance the entire curriculum series, which already includes a stream, river, and lake model. The watershed game, intended to be facilitated by a trained host or educator, has been implemented in classrooms ranging from elementary to high school, as well as board, policy, and community planning meetings for students and stakeholders alike to increase their understanding of best management practices to prevent and reduce impacts, land uses within a watershed and their influences, and collaboration across jurisdictions that are necessary to benefit the watershed in its entirety. Next slide, please. So the watershed game is comprised of two different versions, a local leader and then also a classroom version. Both versions adopt the same, clean water goal and role play management scenarios. However, the structures just differ slightly. The local leader version is designated for larger groups of up to 25 people, geared towards appointed officials, members of watershed organizations, association members, and other community leaders. There is also one game board in this version, and all the participants all the participants are gathered around one large table looking at the one board, and they interact as a whole group. The interactive approach allows stakeholders to learn about the impact of various land uses on natural resources and practice applying plans and policies to win or meet their clean water goal. Next slide, please. So the classroom version is geared towards middle school students around grades 6 through 9 or 6 through 8, but can be easily adapted to elementary and high school curriculums as well. The version of the game can be played in a smaller group, such as a classroom setting, splitting into multiple game boards by each part of the community, like I mentioned earlier, like the industrial port, agricultural, residential areas, so that 3 to 5 students are able to gather around one student's desk or a smaller table to work in groups. This game is also designed to be played over many periods of a class, so it's not necessarily designed to be played in one fell swoop, I guess. And then I will also note that instead of receiving all the game pieces at the beginning, like the local leader version where they're passed out, students are asked to pick a runner. So they will go up to the front of the classroom to retrieve the tool cards and anticipated event cards, which is kind of a fun way to get the kids up and moving there. The classroom version prompts students to understand the relationships between community connections, water quality, and land uses, all while emphasizing the need for collaboration, cooperative decision-making, and persuasive argument to reach a common goal. Next slide, please. So there's a paper written on the development of the Watershed game. It was developed in 2021, winter of 2021, which outlines the methods and processes of creating the game, and then as well as the need for the coastal model and the specific development for that. The development of the coastal model utilized 5 different methodologies, which were review reports with regard to coastal issues, host a focus group of regional experts through interactive online platforms, create a survey for respondents that were sought out through relevant known contacts, listservs, and conferences, create an online survey through Sea Grant with respondents sought out through National Sea Grant Network, and finally, pilot workshops, which consisted of trial gameplay and focus group discussions. All of these approaches targeted audiences with experience from the Gulf of Mexico and South Atlantic regions, aside from the online Sea Grant survey, which was open to the entire Sea Grant network. And as you can see, I also listed the timeline of development for the coastal model, which ultimately took around 2 years. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to do a brief overview of the results of using each of the methodologies and how they ultimately shaped the development of the coast model. So during the initial reviewing process, 30 reports were reviewed, which represented states such as Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana. After the review, the team concluded, that there were 25 priority issues, and then they further drilled down the top 5, which ended up being land use change and development, water quality degradation, sea level rise, impact of storms, and flooding. The focus groups, comprised of coastal professionals from the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic regions, yielded rich discussion and input from on development, with the general agreement that excess nutrients, flooding, climate change, sea level rise, and coastal erosion were priorities and concerns of several coastal states. The regional Gulf of Mexico and South Atlantic survey, created to determine more input on overarching coastal challenges, yielded around 117 respondents, and the National Sea Grant survey, created to do the same thing, only on the national level, yielded around 30. They do note in this paper that while more participation at the national level would have been preferred, there was still very useful data from each of the regions that was able to be used in development. And then finally, the pilot workshops, which initially were held in 2020, were hosted in Louisiana and Alabama, where 41 participants played draft versions of the game and provided feedback. And I will note that while the overall goal of the game is to reduce non-point source pollution, specifically phosphorus and nitrogen, input from all of these methodologies and all of the different organizations were used to develop the unanticipated event cards, which could bring about unexpected development or even major storms that induce flooding during sporadic times during the game. Another component includes the tool cards, which were actions that players can take to protect their community against the previously mentioned unanticipated events. At the same time, they're trying to reduce the non-point source pollution. The tool cards represent policies, plans, and practices that will guide players to hopefully reaching their clean water goal. Next slide, please. So how does this relate to our public engagement priority actions? By discovering and sharing new ways to connect in the classroom or outside educational setting, we are continually keeping our finger on the pulse of new ways to engage children and adults while introducing sometimes complex or bigger picture topics into the conversation. By utilizing the local leader version of the COAST model, we could also reach new target audiences, such as policymakers and new potential partnering agencies. And in implementing interactive activities like this into our initiatives, we are also facing and learning to overcome the challenges of encouraging individuals to become more mindful of their individual actions to reduce cumulative impacts, as well as breaking down the barrier of making difficult topics and concepts more approachable and relatable. Next slide, please. So just in closing, I hope you've learned a little bit about the Watershed game and how it can be useful and a tool to enhance environmental education initiatives in informing students and adults on the impact of land use, non-point source pollution, and watershed level management. If you are interested in ordering a game, I have a link here, the order WSG, where you can purchase the classroom or the local leader version of the COAST model. The classroom version is $175 and the local leader version is $195. I will note that I attended one of the Train the Trainer sessions and we were given a free version of our choice, whatever version we wanted to, with our registration fee. And that is something that's really useful. You can buy the game, but unless you have contact with a facilitator or attend one of those trainer sessions, it's a little fuzzy on how to use, but all the instructions are there. So you could technically host a Watershed game without going to the training, but it was definitely very useful. And then I've also linked the webpage that shows when the next training events are being held. I haven't seen anything in Florida so far, but there is a sign up link to where you can sign up to receive when the next events are announced. And then also when you're looking for the correct contact person to contact, keep in mind that all trainers are facilitators, but not all facilitators are trainers. And I will say that Kate Rose with Charlotte County Sea Grant and I attended the training back in May. So we welcome any and all questions that you may have if you're just curious. But if you are looking a little bit further into like the development of the game or maybe even hosting a training session near you, I would recommend contacting one of the Minnesota Sea Grant trainers, because I think they travel, pretty far and wide, but I'm not sure if there's any ones coming up in Florida. And that is it for me.
Thank you. How fun. Maybe we can do it at a future meeting. So any questions? Okay, next on, thank you. And thank you for attending and sharing that information.
Oh, it looks like Phil has a question.
Yeah. Okay.
What's the duration for the local leaders? What's the time frame for doing it,
Yeah, so it takes between 2 to 4 hours.
Okay.
So it is a little bit lengthy, but that is why they do encourage you bringing it to like board member meetings or something like that.
Right.
And it just depends on how much the conversation skews away from the actual game, because I know when we were doing the training, they said that sometimes, especially in the local leader version, conversations that bring it back to, regional or local issues, they just kind of start brainstorming and then it kind of snowballs from there. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I just want to say that like the CHNP, we would be glad to get both versions. We have one now, we can get the other, and have a at our next meeting, hopefully in person, have a time devoted for us all to do it together, and then maybe even loan out the games that we have to partners who would like to do it.
Love that idea. That's sort of what I was thinking as well. So it'd be a great way for us to get to know each other.